When I went off to college, it was a totally different environment than what I had been in before. So I had this newfound freedom, and I met this guy who was really cute, lots of fun, and I knew he wasn't like the guys I had dated before. So it was kind of like I packed God up in this little box, and I put him on a shelf, and I said, I'll come back for you later. So I went off and I had fun, and it was great, and everything was good. And then, I just started making decisions that went against what I knew to be right. And about 1.5 years into that relationship, I ended up pregnant. And I couldn't believe it, even though, we were having unprotected sex. I knew that that could happen, but I went through this process of just trying to figure out what is it I'm going to do now. So I sought advice from a friend who said, oh, abortion's easy. I had one at 15. It's no big deal. Nobody will have to find out your secret. That's exactly what I wanted to hear, because I knew that if I go and I just get rid of this problem, because that's the only way I was looking at it, is if I just go get rid of this problem, everything will be solved and we can get back to our fun life we were having. And so I kept justifying this thought of having an abortion by thinking the Supreme Court justices are much smarter than me. They must know something that I don't. And so it's okay to have an abortion, or they wouldn't have made it legal. That's how I kept justifying this decision. And so I made the appointment against his wishes. I was thinking very selfishly, but I made the appointment. I left that day, and I'll never forget the image of him in my mind. He was crying on my front porch, begging me not to go, and I went anyway. And it was a horrible, horrible day. It was March 29th, 1985. I'll never forget that date. I went and I had that abortion, and it was easily the most regrettable mistake of my life. And so I went through with it. It was excruciatingly painful. And I remember leaving that day and just thinking, okay, I've just got to put this behind me. That was horrible, but now I can just get back to life. And for a few days, I felt relief. I would look down at my stomach and think, I don't ever have to tell my dad. I don't ever have to tell anyone that I was pregnant at one time. I can just get back to life. And little did I know that had just opened up a can of worms I would never be able to close. I went through the next 2 weeks trying to get back to life as normal with my boyfriend, and he really couldn't stand the sight of me. And looking back on that now, I don't blame him. Abortion hurts men just as much as it hurts women. So he broke up with me 2 weeks later. I was devastated, of course. I can't believe I wasn't shocked by that, but I felt very rejected. And I knew it was like the realization of what I did hit me that day, because I knew if he rejected me, that if I ever tell anybody else for the rest of my life about what I did on March 29th, that they'll reject me like he did. And so I buried that secret so deeply inside of me, and was just determined that no one was ever going to find that out. So for the next 7 years, I just lived this life of complete and utter chaos. It was total hell on earth, the way I started living after that. Because for one, I made sure nobody would keep my secret, but I had to keep my conscience numb somehow so I didn't think about what I had done. I began to take drugs, I began to drink, I began to just date men who were horrible, bad for me. I was in relationship after relationship. It was just a very, very bleak existence that I started into, because I knew if the drugs wear off, if I come down, if I get sober, then I'll have to realize what I did. And so I knew that I would never be free from this. It was something that was going to be on my record for the rest of my life. And I knew the only way to get out of it was to end my life. And so I started contemplating that. I planned the day, I planned the method. I was living with my stepsister at the time. We shared an apartment. And I knew that she kept a pistol in her nightstand drawer. And so I went to work that day, and I faked being sick. I told everybody I was sick and that I needed to go home. And as I went home, I drove down those roads. This is a very dark day for me, and I always cry. But I remember driving down the road and just realizing this is the last time I'm going to do this. It's the last time I'm going to do that. And it was just a surreal moment. But I came home and I got the pistol out of her nightstand drawer. I sat down on the edge of that couch and I turned that pistol around. And I put the barrel of the gun right between my eyes. And I remember being so afraid, so I didn't want to pull the trigger, but I knew that I had to. And so I put my thumbs on the trigger and I just started pulling very slowly and thought, okay, I won't know when the bullet releases. I can just do it and not consciously do it. And so I remember sitting there and being leaned over and with that gun right between my eyes, and I remember just seeing my tears hit in the dust and knowing that any moment this is going to be over and I'm not going to have to live with this anymore, because I knew all that I was suffering stemmed from that abortion. I was saying, just do it, just do it. And so I started pulling that trigger very slowly. Suddenly, I heard wheels on the gravel outside my apartment as I sat in that position, and nobody was supposed to be home. It was the middle of the day. So I ran to the window, and it was my stepsister home in the middle of the day. She wasn't due for hours. And as I looked out the window down at her car, it was literally the first time I had thought, what would this have done to her had she walked in and saw me like that? I loved her. So I ran and put her gun back before she even came in the house. I jumped in the bed. She said, what are you doing home? I said, I'm sick. She said, she's sick too. And so she went to bed. And I laid there the rest of the day thinking, okay, now what do I do? I had no plan past that day. I knew everything was going to be over. As I was living through this 7 years, I met this guy in a bar, and he was just the greatest guy. He was so nice, and he loved me. He started pursuing me, and I couldn't believe it because I always dated these guys who were losers. And so to have this guy interested in me, it gave me hope again and made me think, okay, maybe I am worth something after all. And so I cleaned myself up enough to get married. We had 2 children right away. My second son was actually born on March 29th. I mean, it was like all of these things God was pulling back into my life. That God that I had boxed up and put on a shelf and said, I'll be back for you later in college, now was bringing this love that I didn't deserve back into my life. But having that first child, my first son, was the most incredible experience of my life. It made me get off drugs. It made me stop drinking. I totally straightened up my life because I thought, okay, I have another person to be living for now. And plus my husband loved me. And so it was just this love came into my life that I knew I did not deserve. But I had finally told him of my abortion, but we didn't know what to do about it. We were still trying to figure it out on human terms, and we could not figure it out. And so I was driving down the road one day with my boys and heard a commercial on the radio of a pregnancy center who was offering a class for women who had had an abortion and were having trouble afterward. And the way I remember it, of course, it's like angels were singing and lights were shining on my car. And it was the most amazing discovery because I thought I was the only one that ever suffered after an abortion. Because in society, they tell you as a woman that it's your right to choose and it was good for you and we don't want to go back to the Stone Age. So what I was experiencing was not computing with what society was telling me. So to hear that there was this class was amazing. So I finally went to this Bible study, and through these women being the conduit for Jesus' love and forgiveness and mercy and grace, it was absolutely amazing. They were there to hold my hand and reconnect me with the God of my youth, and it was the most incredible experience because he just came in and through this Bible study, just being able to find those scriptures that you can apply to that gaping wound of abortion, was absolutely amazing. God's word is what heals this unbelievable wound that abortion leaves you with. It's the only thing that can heal you from that type of wound. So going through this study, working through the guilt and the shame and the regret of an abortion, finally drew a line in the sand and made me allow Jesus to come in and heal me. I had asked him every day for forgiveness for 7 years. I had asked him thousands of times for forgiveness, but it was finding that forgiveness for myself that I needed to find. And really all that is just allowing God's forgiveness to be enough. So being able to go through that study and allowing Jesus to come back into my life and heal me was the greatest discovery of all. When you go from such a dark place and then you open yourself and say, okay, is God's grace really there for me? Is it really going to work? And then when you see that it really does, you just have to allow him to work in your life. It's absolutely amazing.
Sheila Harper is the founder and president of Save One, an international outreach ministry for men and women suffering in silence after an abortion. For more information, go to saveone.org.
Through Save One, we are ending abortion. We're not fighting abortion, we're ending abortion. And that's how we're going to end abortion in our country, is by having these women and now men out telling their stories of the truth of what happens to you when you choose abortion. So as I started seeing Save One develop and seeing that God is wanting to do more than just this be a little Bible study I teach in my church, which was my thinking, like this is all it's ever going to be. He led me to write my first book, which is Save One, An Emotional Guide to Healing After Abortion. So that's the women's study. And then as we started having success with the women's study, men started asking to go through the women's class. That's how badly they were hurting. We're now 170 chapters in 14 countries around the world. That very first book that I wrote that I thought was just going to be used in my church. Don't ever put God in a box. It's not a good place for him to be. He has taken it now and it's been translated into 10 different languages. We're building the kingdom. We're building God's kingdom by ending abortion, by talking about his grace and mercy and love and forgiveness over the sin of abortion.